Hello, welcome back to Rock Records Reviewed. My name's Adam, and this week we're going to rank and review all the studio albums by American swamp rock pioneers Creedence Clearwater Revival, or Creedence, or CCR. I will be variously referring to them as any of those names through the show. Formed in El Cerrito in California in 1959, they were originally named the Blue Velvets, and then, rather unfortunately, the Gollywogs, before finally settling on Creedence Clearwater Revival in 1967. Now, the band was made up of singer and guitarist John Fogerty, his rhythm guitar playing brother Tom, Stu Cook on bass, and Doug Clifford on drums. And despite all of them wanting to write and sing, it was really the large personality of John Fogerty that eventually ended up ruling the roost, something that would prove the band's undoing a short 4 years later after their debut. One of the most ridiculously prolific and successful bands of their time, they made fine album after fine album in really short space of time, and that was really due, I think, to John Fogerty's very disciplined work ethic. Despite being born in California, it was with his songwriting he was able to sort of fuse country, blues, soul, rock and roll, rockabilly to evoke an atmosphere of kind of deep south roots rock and roll, which came to be known as swamp rock. And it was that band's elastic sort of push and pull grooves and his biting tremoloed guitar licks that became their signature sound. You could say he caught swamp gas in a bottle, because the public absolutely lapped it up, and the band had 12 US top 40 hits and 5 top 10 albums in just 4 years. Now, there is an argument that CCR are the archetypal singles band, and if you have both volumes of their best of, then you really have everything that's worth having, especially as they only made 7 albums, which were all relatively short. But, you know, you can only argue that if you don't like extended guitar jams or cracking covers and just very, very likable, listenable deep cuts. So let's get chugling and see what swampy delights CCR have in store for us. So at number 7, I'm going to put their final album from 1972, Mardi Gras. After a fractious 13 years together, John's older brother Tom had finally left by the time Mardi Gras was released. So it was the first and only album the band released as a trio. Now, Stu Cook and Doug Clifford had also finally stood up for themselves and demanded a credit in songwriting and singing duties, and rather surprisingly, they got it. Now, many people do feel that this is actually the sound of John Fogerty trying to sabotage his own band and find a reason to disband the group and embark upon a solo career. And the result is a patchy album. Clifford and Cook were not experienced songwriters, let alone singers. And even John Fogerty has admitted that this is, by some way, their weakest album. It does, though, have really good moments like Sweet Hitchhiker, which is a worthy addition to their canon. But in truth, you could look at it from the other side of the coin and say that John Fogerty's well of hits was really starting to run dry. John Landau wrote in Rolling Stone at the time that this was the worst album ever released by a major band. Now, look, it may not be that bad, and it was still a relative commercial success, getting to number 12 in the USA, but it failed to chart in the UK despite being a gold album in the States. But nobody rates this as the best CCR album, and if they do, they're probably a bit unhinged. Number 6, from 1968, I'm going to put their debut album, Creedence Clearwater Revival. Now, while most of their peers at the time were getting into psychedelic rock and everything that goes with it, CCR, still known as the Gollywogs at this time, got down to writing and rehearsing and developing a unique sound. And the result was that Saul Zaentz, who had bought Fantasy Records, came along and offered them a record deal if they agreed to change their name, which of course they did, to Creedence Clearwater Revival, and the result was their eponymous debut album. And it was an album that really established their sound and their groove for their entire career, and arguably beyond. It's a short album. It's only got 7 songs, including 3 covers, but they are fantastic covers, including Susie Q and I Put a Spell on You, which both have fantastic extended guitar jams in there. It was called at the time, gloriously out of step with the times when it came out, because this was just a year after the Summer of Love. And as such, it really, really appealed to a lot of rock music fans who were looking for something a little less trippy than most of the popular bands at the time. Eventually went gold by 1970. It reached a modest number 53, though, when it actually came out in the US album chart. But far, far greater success was just around the corner. Or down on the corner, you could say. See what I did there? At number 5, I'm going to put their second album from 1969, Bayou Country. Already by album number 2, Fogerty was taking control of Creedence, the Creedence reigns, and he was causing some unrest with the band with his approach as well. The album was produced by Fogerty himself, and he took all the lead vocals, wrote all the songs, apart from the cover on here, and this diminished and irritated his equally ambitious and outspoken band members, and the seeds for the CCR turmoil which dogged their record-making career was sown. That said, the proof of the pudding is in the music, and it's their breakthrough album, and it heralded the start of an insanely prolific 1969 that bore not 1, not 2, but 3 hit albums all in one year. This one was released in January at the start of the year, and it is the very, very essence of CCR. You've got Born on the Bayou with it opens with Born on the Bayou with its trademark Fogerty tremolo guitar lick, setting the scene, and you could just imagine the American soldiers silently creeping through the bush in Vietnamese jungle as John Fogerty and the boys blast away on the soundtrack behind them. It's a cliche, but it's one that's used time and time again because it just works, and we'll talk about CCR's relationship with Vietnam a little bit later. The album's best known for Proud Mary, which has now become a pub rock standard and was gloriously covered by Ike and Tina Turner. You've also got Born on the Bayou on here, and a raucous cover of Good Golly Miss Molly. But I can probably live without the 8-minute jam of Graveyard Train. And the general criticism is that it's probably a bit of an inconsistent album. Keep On Chugolin does just that for a while without being particularly interesting. There's only 7 songs on here, and 2 or 3 of them are more or less extended jams. But still, number 7 in the US, 52 in the UK, and went 2 times platinum. At number 4, I'm going to put their 6th album from 1970, Pendulum. Now, Pendulum is regarded by some as probably the last great CCR album. And this is where Fogerty was finally tempted to layer the sound a little bit, adding keys and horns, many of which he played himself as overdubs to songs that they learnt in the studio. So they weren't rehearsed up beforehand, which was a new approach for the band, and I think it inevitably led to some tensions which reached boiling point and forced Tom Fogerty to finally leave the band after this album came out. It's the band's only album not to feature any cover songs, but what we do get here are songs like Hey Tonight, the fabulous Have You Ever Seen the Rain, Melina, and the absolutely beautiful It's Just a Thought. In many ways, this is their most rounded album, if that makes sense. Sonically, the sound is punchier. It's possibly even a little bit deeper than normal, but some critics thought it was a bit overcooked. I like the horn and the horns and the keys. I think they've done very, very well on this record, and it's just a different flavour of CCR. It depends what kind of mood you're in and how you want to take them. Got to number 5 in the USA, 8 in the UK, went platinum, and but you know, ultimately, as great as some of this is, a lot of people, the criticism was that perhaps CCR's golden touch, there were signs that it was finally starting to desert them. And number 3, gosh, we're at number 3 already. I'm going to put their 4th album from 1969, Willy and the Poor Boys. By the end of 1969, when this came out, the band were one of the hottest acts in the world, but there was no let-up in the work ethic. Fogerty was paranoid about being out of the charts, recognizing that fame and success were fleeting and that they had to strike while the iron was hot and while the hits were coming. This was meant to be a concept album about a jug band, but I think the only ideas that really remained from that concept are the artwork, and a couple of the songs. The Poor Boy Shuffle, that definitely remained from the original concept. But what we get instead is a sort of an effortless album of great guitar songs. and where the band grooves and tugles with a new layer of acoustic guitars on there to add a little bit of depth and a new light and shade to the band's sound. One traditional folk song on here, Midnight Special, which was also made famous by Leadbelly. They also cover one of Leadbelly's own songs, an excellent version of Cotton Fields. This also has the scathing anti-Vietnam song on it, Fortunate Son, which is the song that really sort of set the tradition for the band to forever be associated with Vietnam War films. And you've also got the classic Down on the Corner here as well. Number 3 in the USA and 10 in the UK, 2 times platinum, and 193 on Rolling Stone's greatest albums of all time, as well as many, many other critical accolades aside. At number 2, now I love these top 2 albums, so it's kind of a bit, push and pull about which one goes where, but today I'm going to put from 1970, their 5th album, Cosmo's Factory. And this opens with the killer riff of Ramble Tamble, and this is the sound of a band absolutely on top of its game. And it must be said, I think that Cook and Clifford are one of rock music's great underrated rhythm sections. They have a way with a groove that's undeniably unique and infectious. In a year when the band released 3 albums and even played Woodstock, the list of classics on this album is breathtaking. You've got Traveling Band, Who'll Stop the Rain, Up Around the Bend, Run Through the Jungle, Looking Out My Back Door, As Long As I Can See the Light. That's over half a side of bona fide rock classics. This is regarded by many as the band's masterpiece, and it's also regarded by many as one of the greatest albums ever made in rock history. It does have 4 covers on it, though. That's my caveat with it, more than any other Creedence album. Although one of them is the Epic. I heard it through the grapevine. And generally they are very, very strong covers. The band, one of the things the band could do was really know how to make a cover sound their own. They were brilliant at interpreting other people's songs. Number 1 in the UK and in the US as well, 4 times platinum and 413 on a Rolling Stone's greatest albums of all time list. But that takes us to my number 1 Creedence album, and if you haven't sussed it by now, it is their 3rd album from 1969, Green River. This came out in August, so this was the middle of the 3 albums, the trio that came out in 1969, and this was a considerable step up from Bayou Country. It was during this period that the band's real single-minded work ethic was really kicking in. The band eschewed acid and mind-altering drugs, favoured by so many of their peers at the time, and they rehearsed endlessly, something that the other 3 members often found exhausting. That said, it worked, this album was the album that really made the band superstars at the time, with a sound that many felt was the very, very definition of a catchy southern roots rock and roll that appealed to the entire nation and elsewhere. So many of these songs have become American rock radio staples. There was 9 songs on here, and none of them outstay their welcome. Even the longest songs on here are considerably less than 5 minutes long. But you've got Green River, Tombstone Shadow, Commotion, Lodi, Nighttime is the Right Time, and the classic Bad Moon Rising, which some of you may remember was used to great effect in the brilliant film American Werewolf in London. This album's just chock full of great songs, and even the less great songs are ever so quickly, they don't outstay their welcome at all. Number 1 in the USA, number 20 in the UK, and 3 times platinum, 95 on the Rolling Stones' greatest albums of all time. And of course it made the 1001 albums you must hear before you die. That's my list of CCR albums. I think the top 3 here particularly are all any 3 of those albums could have got to number 1, I think. Post Creedence, Fogerty's career was for years mired in legal controversy, so far too boring and complex to go into here. Suffice to say that Fantasy Records boss Saul Zaentz and John Fogerty disagreed on a great many aspects of his contract, and Fogerty for many years even refused to play CCR songs when he toured as a solo artist. His chart-topping album from 1985, Centerfield, though, is a cracking one and worth checking out if you don't know it. And how I think now, happily, much of the legal issues have been resolved, and Fogerty's once again singing Creedence songs and earning a healthier royalty when he does so. Tom Fogerty sadly died in 1990 of AIDS-related illnesses and complications. And Cook and Clifford formed Creedence Clearwater Revisited in 1995. Playing Creedence songs, but John Fogerty took out an injunction to try and stop them, so they changed their name to Cosmo's Factory, but a court ruled in Cook and Clifford's favour, and eventually they changed their name back to Creedence Clearwater Revisited and are still touring as that today. Certainly, sadly, there seems to be no love lost between Fogerty and Cook and Clifford, but if you ask me, I say life's just too short for such nonsense. Anyway, that's my list of Creedence albums. I hope you enjoyed it. If you don't know Creedence that well, then do check out any of the top 3 albums, particularly here, or do get both of their best-ofs, which literally don't have a single bad track on them. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you again soon for another Rock Records Reviewed. Thank you. Bye-bye. Records Reviewed.